The year was 2847, and humanity had spread across 300 star systems, but few remembered the dark days of 2156, when Earth faced extinction. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship Endeavour and reviewed ancient historical files that most humans had long forgotten, his eyes scanning through records that told a story of near annihilation and unexpected salvation. The holographic display showed grainy footage of skeletal alien vessels descending through Earth's poisoned atmosphere during the Great Collapse, when nuclear winter and plague had reduced humanity to scattered millions, hiding in underground bunkers and ruined cities. The Valanthi had come then, a species of crystalline beings from the Andromeda Galaxy who had detected Earth's death throes from impossible distances across the void of space. They asked for nothing, and they expected nothing in return for what they were about to do. They simply helped. Footage of those strange, beautiful ships landing in the wastelands of what had once been North America, their crystalline hulls reflecting the dim sunlight that struggled through clouds of ash and radiation. The first Valanthi to step onto Earth's soil had been a being called High-Resonance Kethval, a creature of living crystal whose body sang with harmonics that humans could barely hear, but somehow felt deep in their bones. The historical records showed Kethval approaching a group of terrified human survivors who had emerged from their bunker expecting death, but instead finding something they had lost long ago: hope. For 40 years, the Valanthi shared their technology with the broken remnants of humanity, teaching them secrets of energy production and medicine that would have taken humans centuries to discover on their own. They purified Earth's poisoned atmosphere using machines that could break down radiation and filter toxins from the very air itself. They cured the plagues that had been killing thousands every day, diseases created by biological weapons that had spiraled beyond anyone's control during the final wars. They taught humans to reach the stars, sharing the principles of faster-than-light travel that would eventually allow humanity to spread across the galaxy. And through all of this, they asked for nothing, not resources or territory or allegiance or worship. When human leaders tried to offer payment or treaties of alliance, the Valanthi simply declined with what seemed like gentle amusement, their crystalline bodies chiming with sounds that translators rendered as polite refusal. Then, without ceremony, after 4 decades of patient work to rebuild human civilization, the Valanthi departed. Their final message to humanity was simple and strange. They said only that they had debts of their own to repay from ancient times when another species had saved them from extinction, and that helping humanity had been their way of passing forward a kindness they had received long ago. Jake had read that message 100 times over the years, and each time he felt the same strange mix of gratitude and inadequacy. The Valanthi had given humanity everything, and humanity had given them nothing in return. Lieutenant Amy Grant interrupted his thoughts with a quiet word, her voice carrying a tension that immediately put Jake on alert. A priority transmission had arrived from deep space, from coordinates beyond the galactic rim, where no human ship had ever traveled. The message had been bouncing through relay stations for weeks, growing weaker with each jump, until it barely registered on their sensors. Jake ordered it played, and the bridge fell silent as the transmission filled the air. The voice belonged to High-Resonance Kethval, the same being who had first set foot on Earth 7 centuries ago. And the ancient alien's harmonics carried notes of sorrow and acceptance that needed no translation. The Valanthi homeworld was dying. An expanding quantum singularity had appeared in their star system, a tear in the fabric of space itself that consumed everything it touched and grew larger with each passing day. They had 3 solar cycles before complete annihilation. The crystalline beings had tried everything their advanced science could offer, but the singularity was beyond their ability to stop or even slow. Kethval explained, that the Volanthi had sent this message not to ask for help, because they knew no help was possible. They had sent it simply to say goodbye to the species they had once nurtured, to let humanity know that their ancient benefactors were passing from the universe, and to wish them well in the ages to come. The message ended with a phrase that Jake's translator struggled to render properly. Something about cycles of kindness and the satisfaction of knowing that their gift to humanity had not been wasted. Amy was crying silently at her station, and Jake realized that his own eyes were wet. He thought about his grandmother who had told him stories of the Volanthi when he was a child, tales passed down through generations of the Morrison family, about the day the crystal ships came down from the sky. His great-great-great-grandmother had been one of the survivors, pulled from the ruins of Denver by Volanthi rescue teams, a teenage girl who had been alone and starving for weeks before those strange, beautiful beings had found her and carried her to safety. Without the Volanthi, there would be no Morrison family, and no human civilization, and no starships crossing the galaxy. There would be only bones and silence on a dead world. Jake closed the historical files and stood very still for a long moment, feeling the weight of 7 centuries of debt pressing down on his shoulders. Then he opened a channel to Earth Central Command, began to speak in a voice that surprised him with its steadiness. He told them about the message and about the dying Volanthi homeworld, and about the 3 solar cycles that remained before an entire species vanished from existence. And then he said something that would change the course of human history. He said that humanity owed the Volanthi everything, and that it was time to pay that debt. He said that humans needed to find a way to save the beings who had saved them, no matter how impossible it seemed. The response from Earth Central Command came faster than Jake had expected, and it carried the weight of absolute authority. Every ship in the human fleet was to converge on Luna Station for an emergency assembly. The message had been forwarded to every colony world and every space station and every mining outpost across 300 star systems, and from every corner of human civilization, the same response was coming back. Captains and governors and ordinary citizens who had all grown up hearing stories of the Volanthi and what they had done for humanity. The response was simple and unanimous. We will help. Jake looked out at the stars through the Endeavor's view screen and thought about the impossible distance between human space and the Volanthi homeworld, about the quantum singularity that even the Volanthi could not stop, about the 3 solar cycles that were already ticking away. The odds were terrible, and the challenge was beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. But the Volanthi had faced similar odds when they chose to help a dying species on a poisoned world 7 centuries ago. They had not calculated the costs or debated the risks. They had simply helped. And now it was humanity's turn to do the same. Within hours of the transmission reaching Earth, something unprecedented occurred across all of human civilization. The United Human Coalition was typically fractured by political disputes and territorial squabbles and economic rivalries that sometimes threatened to tear the Great Alliance apart. Colony worlds argued with Earth over trade agreements and mining rights and the distribution of resources. Outer Rim settlements complained about being ignored by the core worlds, while inner system planets worried about the ambitions of their distant cousins. But when news of the Volanthi crisis spread through the quantum communication network, all of that noise simply stopped. One by one, every colony world and every space station and every mining outpost and every research facility sent the same message to Earth Central Command. We will help. Whatever you need from us, you can have it. Admiral Patricia Cole had served in the human fleet for 40 years. And she had never seen anything like this unified response. She convened an emergency assembly on Luna Station within 18 hours of receiving Commander Morrison's report, and representatives from all 300 human worlds attended via quantum link. The Great Hall of Luna Station was designed to hold 10,000 people, but it felt small, as holographic images of delegates from across the galaxy filled every available space. Patricia stood at the central podium and looked out at faces that represented the full diversity of human civilization. There were delegates from the wealthy core worlds with their perfect suits and polished manners. There were rough-hewn representatives from mining colonies who had never set foot on a planet with a natural atmosphere. There were scientists and soldiers and merchants and farmers and artists and engineers. And every single one of them was waiting to hear the same thing. Patricia began to speak. Weathered face was displayed on screens across human space as her words reached billions of ears. She told them the story that every human child learned in school, but which most adults had forgotten in the busy rush of daily life. She told them about the Great Collapse and the nuclear winter and the plagues that had killed 9 billion people in less than a decade. She told them about the scattered survivors hiding in bunkers and ruins, starving and sick and waiting to die. She told them about the day the Valanthi ships appeared in Earth's poisoned skies, and everything changed. The Valanthi saved us when we were nothing, Patricia said, her voice carrying across light years of space. We were dying, and scattered, and hopeless, and they could have passed us by without a second thought. They could have harvested our planet for resources, since we were too weak to stop them. They could have studied us like specimens, or enslaved us, or simply ignored our suffer, the way countless other species have ignored the struggles of their neighbors. Instead, they gave us everything, and asked for nothing. Patricia paused to let the weight of history settle over the assembly. Now they face extinction, she continued. A quantum singularity is consuming their star system, and they have no way to stop it. They have 3 solar cycles before their homeworld is destroyed and their entire species is wiped from existence. Patricia's hands gripped the podium as she delivered the next words. They sent us a message to say goodbye, she said. Not to ask for help, because they believe no help is possible. They simply wanted us to know that they were passing from the universe and to wish us well. They underestimate what humanity has become, and they underestimate what gratitude means to us. The assembly erupted in a wave of sound as delegates shouted their support and their determination to do whatever was necessary. Patricia called for order and introduced Chief Engineer Daniel Brooks, humanity's foremost expert on exotic matter and quantum physics. Daniel was a small man, with tired eyes who looked like he had not slept in days, which was accurate, since he had been working on theoretical solutions since the moment he heard about the Valanthi crisis. He stepped up to the podium and began to explain in simple terms what they were facing. The quantum singularity was a tear in space-time itself, a wound in the fabric of reality that grew larger as it consumed matter and energy. Normal physics could not stop it, because it existed partially outside of normal physics. The Valanthi had tried everything their advanced science could offer, but they had failed because they were approaching the problem from the wrong direction. Daniel believed he had found another way. He had spent years studying the exotic matter that powered human faster than light engines, and he had discovered that under certain conditions, this matter could interact with quantum singularities in unexpected ways. If they could deliver a precisely calibrated charge of exotic matter directly into the heart of the singularity, they might be able to collapse it inward upon itself and seal the tear in spacetime. The assembly listened in tense silence as Daniel explained the details of his plan. It was dangerous and untested, and relied on theoretical physics that had never been proven in practice. It would require more energy than humanity had ever harnessed in a single moment, the combined output of hundreds of Starship reactors working in perfect synchronization. And it would also require a sacrifice. The exotic matter charge needed to be delivered from inside the singularity's event horizon, Daniel explained, and whoever piloted the delivery vessel would not be coming back. There was no possible way to escape once you crossed that Threshold. The ship and its pilot would be consumed along with the singularity itself. A heavy silence fell over the assembly as the implications sank in. Someone would have to die to save the Valanthi. Someone would have to fly into the heart of destruction, knowing they would never return. Patricia opened her mouth to call for volunteers, but before she could speak, the communication system chimed with incoming messages. The first volunteer submission arrived within 3 seconds of Daniel finishing his explanation. The second came 2 seconds later. Within 1 minute, 12,000 humans had submitted their names as volunteers for the mission. Soldiers and scientists and pilots and ordinary citizens who had never flown anything more complex than a personal shuttle, all offered to give their lives for beings they had never met. Patricia felt tears on her weathered cheeks as she watched the volunteer list grow longer and longer. Longer. This was humanity at its best, she thought. This was what the Valanthi had saved 7 centuries ago. Not just a species, but a spirit of compassion and courage and gratitude that refused to forget those who had helped them. The vote to approve the mission was unanimous. Every delegate from every world raised their hand in support. The human fleet would converge on the Valanthi homeworld, and they would find a way to stop the singularity, or they would die trying. Patricia dismissed the assembly and began issuing orders for the largest military mobilization in human history. Ships were recalled from every corner of human space. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were converted to manufacture the exotic matter they would need. Scientists who had been working on unrelated projects dropped everything to join Daniel's team. And across 300 worlds, ordinary humans looked up at the stars and thought about crystalline beings they had never seen but somehow loved. The debt would be repaid. Whatever the cost, humanity would pay it. The human fleet assembled at the edge of known space, and it was the largest gathering of vessels in the entire history of their civilization. Over 40,000 ships of every size and configuration hung in the void of space, their running lights creating an artificial constellation that stretched across millions of kilometers. There were massive battleships bristling with weapons that had been designed to fight wars that thankfully never came. There were sleek cruisers built for speed and maneuverability. There were lumbering cargo vessels packed with supplies and equipment and the exotic matter that Daniel Brooks needed for his plan. There were tiny shuttles piloted by civilians who had no military training but refused to be left behind. And there were science vessels crewed by the brightest minds humanity had ever produced, men and women who had spent their lives studying the mysteries of the universe and now faced the greatest challenge of their careers. Captain Lisa Bennett commanded the lead vessel, a heavy cruiser called the Redemption, that had been chosen to carry Daniel's experimental device into the heart of the singularity. Lisa had been selected for this honor not because of her tactical brilliance or her combat record, although both were impressive. She had been chosen because of her grandmother's story. Elena Bennett had been a child during the Great Collapse, just 7 years old when the world ended and humanity began its long descent toward extinction. She had been living in the ruins of Chicago with her parents when the sickness came, the plague that killed her mother and father within days of each other, and left little Elena alone in a world of corpses and ash. Elena had survived for 3 weeks by hiding in the basement of a collapsed building and drinking rainwater that collected in broken pipes. She was close to death when the Valanthi found her. Lisa had grown up hearing the story of how a crystalline being had descended into that basement and lifted Elena gently in arms that chimed like bells. The Valanthi had carried her grandmother to their ship and nursed her back to health over weeks of patient care. Elena had never forgotten the sound of their voices or the way their crystalline bodies caught the light. She had passed those memories to her children, and her children had passed them to theirs, until the story reached Lisa's ears. Now Lisa stood on the bridge of the redemption and prepared to repay a debt that was 7 centuries old. "All ships," she announced over the fleet channel. "We make the jump in 60 seconds." Her voice was steady, despite the fear that coiled in her stomach. Fear not of death, but of failure. "Whatever we find on the other side, remember why we are here," she continued. "The Valanthi gave us our future when they had no reason to care about our survival. They asked nothing in return. Except that we become something worthy of being saved. Today we prove that their faith in us was not misplaced. Today we return the favor." The countdown reached 0, and 40,000 ships activated their faster-than-light engines simultaneously. The cascade of light was visible from distant worlds, where alien astronomers would puzzle over the phenomenon for generations, not understanding that they were witnessing the largest coordinated jump in galactic history. The fleet emerged in Valanthi space, and what they found made even the most hardened veterans gasp in horror. The quantum singularity was worse than any of them had imagined. It hung in the center of the star system like a wound in reality itself, a sphere of absolute darkness that swallowed all light and matter that touched it. 2 of the system's 7 planets had already been consumed, reduced to nothing by the inexorable expansion of the void, beginning to break apart as the singularity's gravity tore at its surface, and the Valanthi homeworld hung at the edge of the expanding darkness, so close that Lisa could see the crystalline cities that covered its surface beginning to crack under the gravitational stress. But what truly shocked the human fleet was not the singularity itself. It was the Valanthi ships. Thousands of crystalline vessels were evacuating the homeworld, carrying the last survivors of an ancient civilization away from the only home they had ever known. But they were not fleeing towards safety. They were flying toward the singularity. Lisa watched in horror as ship after ship plunged into the void, their crystalline hulls flashing once with reflected starlight, before vanishing forever. The Valanthi were choosing death over the slow torture of watching their world consumed. They were ending their existence on their own terms, rather than waiting for the darkness to take them. "Open a channel to the Valanthi command frequency," Lisa ordered, her voice tight with urgency. "All frequencies, broadcast on everything we have. Tell them help has arrived." The communications officer worked frantically at her console, and moments later a response came through the speakers. The voice belonged to high-resonance Kethval, and the ancient alien's harmonics carried notes of disbelief and something that might have been hope. "Humans," Kethval said, and even through the translation software, Lisa could hear the shock in that single word. "Why have you come? This is not your burden to carry. This is not your fight. Our fate was sealed the moment the singularity appeared." Lisa smiled despite the fear and grief that threatened to overwhelm her. "You made it our burden the day you saved us," she replied. "You made it our fight when you chose to help a dying species on a poisoned world. Now please get out of our way. We have work to do." There was a long pause as Kethval processed her words. Then the ancient being spoke again, and this time the harmonics carried something Lisa had never expected to hear from an alien voice. Gratitude mixed with wonder, mixed with a fragile, trembling hope. The Valanthi ships stopped their flight toward the singularity. One by one they turned away from death and formed up alongside the human fleet. And for the first time in weeks, high-resonance Kethval allowed hope to enter what passed for a Valanthi heart. The humans had come. Against all reason and probability, the children of Earth had crossed the galaxy to save their ancient benefactors. Perhaps the universe was not as cold and uncaring as Kethval had come to believe. Perhaps kindness really did echo through the ages. Perhaps there was still a chance. The plan required perfect coordination between hundreds of ships, working in absolute synchronization. 400 of the largest human vessels would form a containment sphere around the quantum singularity. Their reactors linked together to create a unified energy field that would stabilize the exotic matter during its final approach. Inside this sphere, the Redemption would carry Daniel Brooks and his experimental device on a one-way journey into the heart of the void. Lisa had already decided that she would pilot the insertion vessel herself. She had chosen this mission, knowing what it meant, and she would not ask anyone else to make a sacrifice she was unwilling to make. The containment sphere began to form as ships moved into their assigned positions with careful precision. Engineers monitored power levels, while scientists tracked the singularity's expansion rate and calculated the exact moment when the device would need to be deployed. Everything was proceeding according to plan until the singularity pulsed. Without warning, the dark sphere at the center of the system shuddered and expanded, jumping outward by thousands of kilometers in a single heartbeat. The gravitational wave hit the human fleet like a physical blow, sending ships tumbling and breaking the careful formation they had spent hours creating. Lisa gripped her command chair as the Redemption shook violently around her. Damage reports flooded in from across the fleet as vessels struggled to regain control. And then, Daniel's voice came through the speakers with news that turned Lisa's blood to ice. "The singularity's growth rate has accelerated," Daniel reported from his station deep in the Redemption's engineering section. "My calculations were based on the previous expansion pattern, but something has changed. We have hours, not days. If we wait any longer, the exotic matter charge will not be sufficient to collapse the singularity. We need to launch now." Lisa looked at the tactical display, showing the scattered fleet and the expanding void that threatened to consume them all. They had not finished forming the containment sphere. The power grid linking the ships together was incomplete. Launching now meant a significantly higher chance of failure. But waiting meant certain death for everyone in the system. "Prepare for immediate launch," Lisa ordered. "All ships focus on reforming the containment sphere as quickly as possible. We will adjust the plan as we go." She was about to head for the insertion shuttle when something unexpected happened. A Valanthi ship broke formation and began accelerating toward the singularity on an intercept course that would take it directly into the path the Redemption was supposed to follow. High-resonance Kethval's voice filled the communication channel before Lisa could demand an explanation. "We have been monitoring your communications," the ancient alien said. "We have calculated your device's requirements, and we understand the mathematics of your plan. We also understand what you intend to do, Captain Bennett." Lisa's hands trembled over her console as she realized what was happening. "Kethval, please stop," she said. "We came here to save you, not to watch you die." There was a pause before Kethval responded, and when the alien spoke again, the harmonics carried a warmth that Lisa had never heard before. "You came here because of who you are," Kethval said. "You came here because 700 years ago we made a choice to help a dying species, and that choice planted a seed of kindness that has grown beyond anything we imagined. Your species crossed the galaxy to save us when you had every reason to stay safely in your own space. You built machines and gathered resources and risked your lives for beings you have never met. That is already a salvation beyond measure." Lisa felt tears streaming down her face as Kethval continued. "We are old, Captain Bennett. My people have lived for eons uncounted. We were ancient when your species was still learning to make fire on the plains of Africa. We have seen civilizations rise and fall, and we have watched countless stars burn out. We are tired in ways that your young minds cannot comprehend. But you," Kethval said, and the harmonics carried something that sounded almost like joy. "You are young and vital, and carrying possibilities that we cannot imagine. Your species has only begun to explore what it might become. The universe needs you more than it needs us. Let us make this final gift." The Valanthi ship was already approaching the boundary of the containment sphere, moving faster than any human vessel could match. Daniel had transferred the exotic matter device to Kethval's ship. During their earlier approach, working with Valanthi engineers to install it in a vessel that could withstand the gravitational forces near the Singularity's event horizon. Lisa realized with a sickening certainty that this had been planned. The Valanthi had intended this from the moment they understood what the human mission required. "Kethval, please," Lisa said again. "We owe you everything. Let us repay that debt." "You owe us nothing," Kethval replied. "But we owe you a truth that we have never spoken before. When we saved humanity 7 centuries ago, we did so because another species had saved us long before that. We believed we were repaying a debt and nothing more. We did not expect to feel anything for the creatures we helped. But we did feel something, Captain Bennett. We watched your species grow and learn and reach for the stars, and we felt something that we did not have a name for. Pride, perhaps. Love. Or simply joy at knowing that our gift had not been wasted. You have proven today that we were right to help you. You have proven that humanity was worth saving. Carry our memory forward, young ones. Tell your children about the Valanthi and what we did for each other. That is repayment enough." The crystalline ship plunged into the singularity, and for a moment, nothing happened. Lisa watched the tactical display with her heart frozen in her chest. Then, light erupted from the heart of the void. Pure crystalline light that blazed brighter than any star. The exotic matter reacted with the quantum singularity exactly as Daniel had predicted. The tear in spacetime began to collapse inward upon itself, folding and shrinking until it was nothing more than a point of impossible brightness. And then even that disappeared. Where the singularity had been, there was only normal space. Where Kethval's ship had been, there was only stardust and silence. The quantum singularity that had threatened to consume an entire star system had simply ceased to exist. The Valanthi homeworld was saved. But high-resonance Kethval, the being who had first set foot on Earth and who had carried Lisa's grandmother from the ruins of Chicago, was gone forever. Lisa sat in her command chair and wept for an alien she had never truly known, but somehow loved. Around her, the human fleet began the long work of helping the Valanthi rebuild their shattered world. And across the void of space, the light of Kethval's final gift continued to spread, carrying with it a message that would echo through the ages. Kindness is never wasted, and debts of the heart are always worth repaying. The Valanthi homeworld was saved, and 2 billion crystalline beings, who had resigned themselves to extinction, looked up at skies that would remain stable for billions of years to come. In the days that followed the singularity's collapse, the human fleet remained in Valanthi space, helping to repair the damage that the gravitational distortions had caused to the crystalline cities. Engineers from Earth worked alongside Valanthi builders to restore power systems and communication networks. Medical teams treated injuries using a combination of human and alien techniques. Ships that had been designed for war became vessels of mercy, carrying supplies and equipment to communities that had been cut off during the crisis. And slowly, the Valanthi began to emerge from the shock of their near extinction. For the first time in centuries, they looked at humans not as the children they had saved, but as equals, who had proven themselves worthy of respect and cooperation. Admiration. The aftermath of that day changed more than one world. News of humanity's action spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel, carried by quantum communication networks and whispered between species who had never before had reason to speak to each other. The story was almost too remarkable to believe. A young species had crossed the galaxy to save their ancient benefactors. They had risked everything with no guarantee of success. They had offered to die so that others might live. Species who had dismissed humans as aggressive newcomers to the galactic stage began to reassess their judgments. Civilizations that had refused all contact with humanity reopened diplomatic channels. Trade agreements that had been stalled for decades were suddenly approved. Borders that had been closed for centuries were opened. The Volanthi themselves emerged from their long isolation and became humanity's staunchest allies, sharing knowledge and technology that they had kept secret for millions of years. And other species watched this alliance form and wondered if they too might find such friends among the stars. 10 years after the Singularity's collapse, Admiral Lisa Bennett returned to the Volanthi homeworld for a ceremony that had taken a decade to prepare. She was no longer a captain commanding a single cruiser, but the highest-ranking officer in the human fleet. The years had added silver to her hair and lines to her face, but her eyes still held the same determination that had carried her across the galaxy. A monument had been constructed at the exact coordinates where Kethval's ship had made its final journey. It was a spire of living crystal that reached toward the heavens, grown from the same material as the Volanthi themselves. When starlight touched the monument, it sang with harmonics that echoed across the planet, a voice of crystal and light that would never fall silent. But the monument was not dedicated to Kethval alone. It was called the Bridge of Reciprocity, and it honored both the Volanthi who had saved humanity in its darkest hour, and the humans who had crossed the universe to return that kindness. New High Resonance Talveth, who had taken Kethval's place as leader of the Volanthi, spoke at the dedication ceremony. The crystalline being stood before a crowd that included humans and Volanthi and ambassadors from dozens of species who had come to witness this moment in galactic history. Long ago we saved humanity because an ancient species had once saved us, Talveth said. We believed we were repaying a debt and nothing more. We did not understand that kindness is not a transaction to be balanced and closed. It is a seed planted in the soil of the universe. Planted once, and it grows beyond all expectation. It spreads roots and branches that reach further than any one being can. It bears fruit that feeds generations yet unborn. And it creates connections between souls that transcend species and time and even death itself. Lisa stood beside the alien leader and looked out at the mixed crowd that filled the ceremonial plaza. Human faces mingled with crystalline forms. Delegates from worlds she had never visited stood alongside friends she had known for decades. Children who had been born since the crisis played together without regard for the differences between their species. This was what they had saved, Lisa realized. Not just the Volanthi homeworld, but the possibility of connection. Not just one species, but the idea that strangers could become family. She stepped forward to the podium and spoke words that she had spent years preparing. The Volanthi taught us to reach the stars, she said. They gave us technology and knowledge and the means to build a civilization that spans hundreds of worlds. But more importantly, they taught us who we could become. When we received word of their crisis, we did not calculate costs or debate politics or weigh the risks against the benefits. We simply went. We went because 7 centuries ago, the Volanthi made a choice to help us. We went because our grandparents and their grandparents told us stories about crystalline beings who came down from the sky. We went because we remembered what it meant to be saved when we had no hope. And in going, we discovered something about ourselves. Lisa paused and looked up at the monument that sang with Kethval's voice. We discovered that we were worthy of being saved, she said. We discovered that the Volanthi's faith in us had not been misplaced. We discovered that humanity at its best is capable of compassion and courage and sacrifice that can transform the destiny of worlds. High resonance Kethval gave everything to save us, Lisa continued. Not just at the end, when the ancient being flew into the singularity, but at the beginning, when the Volanthi chose to help a dying species on a poisoned world. That choice echoed through 7 centuries, and it will echo through 7 more, and 7 after that. Because kindness is never wasted. Because gratitude is never forgotten. Because we are all part of a chain that stretches back to the first being who ever chose to help another. The ceremony ended with humans and Volanthi standing together beneath alien stars. All debts had been paid, new alliances had been forged, and across the cosmos other species watched and wondered. If they were ever in need, would anyone come for them? Would anyone cross the void to save strangers they had never met? Would anyone remember kindness given long ago? The answer that humanity gave that day was yes, always yes, no matter the cost, or the distance, or the odds of always yes. The universe was a cold and vast place, full of darkness and danger and species who cared only for their own survival. But it was a little less cold, because 2 civilizations had chosen compassion over indifference. It was a little less dark, because beings of flesh and crystal had reached across the void to clasp hands. And it was a little more hopeful, because one act of kindness, 7 centuries ago, had transformed into something that would echo through eternity. The bridge of reciprocity sang its endless song, and the stars themselves seemed to listen.